Hello and welcome to ATG the podcast, and I'm very pleased to be talking today to Stacey Greenwell. So Stacey, I won't even try to summarise your extensive career, but let's go a little bit about from your background. You started off studying English at the University of Kentucky, where you still are.
Yes, I did. I'd actually wished to go to the University of Kentucky from the time I was a child. Also, I'm one of those strange people who wished to be a librarian from the time I was a child. And the University of Kentucky has the only ALA accredited master's program in the state. So I had set my sights here and for the most part have never looked back.
Astonishing. Today you wear several hats, and we'll go into some of these various activities that you do. But your first library experience after the library qualification was in a public library.
Yes, I was fortunate to start working in my hometown at the public library while I was in high school. So that was really one of my first jobs. And it was a wonderful time. I'll be dating myself a bit with this, but it was a wonderful time because I learned how to file catalog cards, how to unjam a charging machine. I also was part of our automation project where we spent the summer with shelfless drawers doing inventory to prepare for our automation. So I got to see both sides of things at the very beginning of my career. So that was wonderful. And then I have worked in a few other public library systems, including my first position outside of once I completed my master's degree.
So why move? But clearly, you've stayed in academic libraries ever since. So why move to an academic library?
Well, that's a great question. I started at a public library just because that was the first opportunity that I had, and it was a really great opportunity too because it was the time where public libraries were getting computers from the Gates Foundation. And as a recent MLS grad at the public library system where I was working, they said, oh, well, great, you're young and out of school, you must know about computers here, figure out how to use these things. And so for 3 years, I worked at the Bowling Green, Kentucky Public Library, and I got to do a lot of things there. Like I got to set us up with copy cataloging, mobile checkout on our bookmobile. We didn't have an email or a website. We migrated integrated library systems. So that was all, my responsibility, and I was the solo IT person. So when an opportunity came open at the University of Kentucky to do IT support, but as a faculty librarian, I mean, that was just a perfect fit for me. So I could come back home to the University of Kentucky, where I had gotten both of my degrees. But really important to me, I was going to be working with an entire team of IT people that I could learn from and, not bumble along so much. I don't even want to relate how hard it was to figure out, how to get that website live, by myself at the public library. So I was really excited to be able to work in a large research institution with so many different people and to get to do so many different things. And yeah, I started out in IT here, but yes, I have actually done quite a few things here in my time.
So do you think your initial engagement, your initial involvement with IT, being thrown in at the deep end, is that what gave you the taste for sort of a carrying on in that vein subsequently?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned I was an English major, and so I was very much about literature. I took creative writing classes. I hung out with a lot of writers at the time that I was an undergrad, and even when I was getting my master's degree. Actually, all my focus in my MLS program was cataloging courses. And so I wasn't really thinking about the technology necessarily. So yeah, the opportunity at the public library of getting to do all of these different things, I think that really sparked more of an interest in IT than I'd had, and certainly has contributed to my focus throughout the years.
So subsequently, after a few years, you then did a doctorate in instructional systems design. So by this time, you were focusing much more on sort of a methodology of learning.
Yes, and so one of the things that I'd realized from, teaching my colleagues at first, one of the first things I did here, granted this was almost 25 years ago, but, teaching people how to use office productivity tools and, teaching people how to use, the various website building tools and things like that we had. So I was teaching in that capacity. I was also teaching as a liaison librarian, first of several stints as a liaison librarian. And, I'm doing this teaching, and I'm also creating online, we call them now learning objects, but I'm creating all this online content. But, what foundation did I really have to be doing this teaching and to be building these online objects? So I got really interested in the idea of going back to school and, learning about instructional design and learning, studying learning theory, just taking education courses. I mean, I really hadn't done any of that sort of thing to that point. And so I wanted to learn more about it and make sure I had a good foundation for all of this, teaching that I was doing and all of these, online tutorials and things that I was creating.
Well, perhaps we'll come back to that in a moment. But your current role, your title is Coordinator. Well, you have several titles, but one of the titles is Coordinator of Libraries Educational Service. What does that involve?
Well, that is essentially, it is a role where I bring together all of the instruction librarians here at the University of Kentucky and just people within our library system who have an interest in instruction. To talk to each other and to learn from each other. We actually just met this morning and had a lively conversation, very much a hybrid meeting since it snowed a bit here, so many of my colleagues were on Teams, but we still managed to have a lively discussion about how we're teaching AI or not in the sessions that we've been teaching this semester as our semester's wrapping up. We talked too about, the good strategies for using it ourselves, what works, what doesn't. So, in educational services, yes, it's largely a learning community, but then sometimes we are tasked with things, like a recent example, is we developed a course together, in Canvas, an open enrollment course, for our students and community to use. So, the educational services is basically our instruction librarians.
So does every university have this kind of instruction library component?
I think what you might see more often is an instruction department or an information literacy department, or you might see an organization, and we do have a formal liaison structure as well, that might be just built into the liaison structure. So I think it's kind of neat that we have this separate position that kind of keeps, instruction and good design principles and, also like working with Canvas, our learning management system, somebody who can help people and guide people in technology tools and review courses. I recently, for one of my colleagues here, I reviewed a course that she built and gave her some feedback on different things that she might want to look at. So, I think it's a good role to have in the library, and it's something that I certainly enjoy doing and supporting my colleagues and helping them, build learning objects, helping them develop classroom plans and those sorts of things.
Well, having but not just helping others in the group you described, but I've tried to count the number of books you've authored, but it's at least 6. And I've only written one book, and it was like pulling teeth for me. So how did you do it?
Well, it's actually an interesting story how I got started with that. I'd written a dissertation, and I'd certainly written articles and things, most often, technical kind of how-to articles. A colleague and I did write something back in the early aughts about Facebook profiles for libraries, and this was long before that was even a thing. That's an interesting rabbit hole to go down. At the time, Facebook told us that Facebook is for people and always will be. That was their direct quote. No profiles for libraries or any other entities. And look at how far we've come. So, anyhow, I had been, I had done some writing, but I was teaching. I was teaching an academic libraries course. And the book that I used, I really liked it, but it was out of date. And so I saw that the authors had released another book in a newer edition. So I just contacted them and said, hey, if you are thinking about updating this book, I use it all the time when I teach my academic libraries class. Here are some suggestions, if I may, for if you update this book. Well, if you suggest something like that, it turns out I ended up becoming Edward Evans' co-author for that book, which was wonderful. I'd actually read some of Ed's books in library school. I'm sure many of us have. So that first collaboration led to two other books with Ed that had been published in the U.S. and the U.K. And then I also co-authored another book related to my dissertation work. So, sometimes be careful what you ask for.
In addition to writing books, you also currently edit a journal. This is something called Practical Academic Librarianship. How did you get involved with that?
Oh, that is one of the things that I am so proud to see that it's continuing. I have been a member of the Special Libraries Association for, about 25 years. And if you may have heard that SLA is going through a substantial transition. We're actually becoming part of ASSIST. So we will be essentially a new organization. But the Special Libraries Association, one of the things, like in the early mid-aughts, I guess, probably around 2008 or 9, I thought, there are a lot of people in SLA like me who like the IT aspects of SLA and there are a lot of benefits, but it would be great if there was a division for academic librarians specifically. That way we didn't feel like we needed to go to conferences that were that dealt with generalist topics. But we wanted the specialized program of SLA. So I led a petition drive to start an academic division of SLA. And so that did launch successfully. And one of the first things that colleagues in that division did was to start a journal, Practical Academic Librarianship. And so that launched in 2011 and under the editorship of Leslie Reynolds. And she continued with that journal until 2020 when a colleague here, who's now at the University of Tennessee, Jennifer Bartlett, and I took over the journal. And so we've been co-editing that journal ever since. And, it's great to see that it started from not a whole lot. And we get quite a few submissions for the 2 issues we publish each year. And it's a lot of work, but it's something I'm so glad to see continuing. And we do plan to continue on. We're in discussion with ASSIST about how the journal will continue.
Well, one thing about the journal is it's open access, and there are no publication fees. So how does that work?
Well, we are all volunteers and everything that we do, and we are fortunate that we are hosted through the generosity of the Texas Digital Library. I know there are a number of journals that are hosted on their platform, including us, and we have been there since 2011, and they have been absolutely wonderful to work with.
Do you think will that continue under the new under ASSIST?
I believe that it will. It's something that we're still trying to work out all the details. The SLA academic division actually merged with the education division of SLA. And so Education Libraries is a peer-reviewed journal as well of SLA. And so that they are also part of our group. And so we're kind of looking at how how that journal will continue. And that journal's been around far longer than Practical Academic Librarianship, I think since at least the 70s. Also an open access journal. Focused more for education librarians, the discipline of education, education vendors and that sort of thing. So a lot of interesting stuff there too.
Fascinating. So one of the things I noticed about the journal is there's a really nice in practice column, which is people sort of talking about sort of actually what they did. I mean, how did that come about? Did that exist before you took over?
It did not. So that was something that we came up with. We were actually approached by someone who wanted to, who had an essay to share, and we felt like, well, we do the standard types of research articles, with double-blind peer review. Again, all volunteers. Lending their time to this journal. So we typically publish 2 to 3 research articles in an issue. And we thought, having this in practice would be, a great way to, bring about essays that can help people, in their day-to-day work. And after all, our title is Practical Academic Librarianship. And so that first piece that we ran was a group of librarians who put into practice some liaison outreach, different suggestions, and so they talked about how those worked, and what they might recommend for you. So you couldn't get more practical than that. And we get a number of submissions to that column since we launched it.
Amazing. So going back to your training at library school, do you think the sort of the work you do on publications like Practical Academic Librarianship are all about filling in the gaps for what's left out of formal library training?
I think it contributes, yes, because I feel like the need for practical in library school. I know many of us talk about that, and maybe have experienced that ourselves. That you need the good foundation of information science, how data is structured, the principles of librarianship and intellectual freedom, all the foundational stuff with our profession. I think our schools do an excellent job of, but trying to find practitioners in some cases who have the time and just the capacity to teach courses, or having people teach who are still fairly current in doing the day-to-day work. It can be challenging for students to get a real sense of the practical. So that, I think that's been another great thing about the journal, is that we do try to make sure that what we publish are things that you can take and run with perhaps at your institution, or at least for the library science students, things you can learn about. In this current issue, we have, the in practice is actually about copyright conventions, and how you can work with, you can talk about copyright at comic book conventions, and so that that's maybe something that students didn't necessarily think of. Likewise, how much do people necessarily know about academic libraries having book sales, especially like in this day and age? But they still do, and so we've got a piece about that. So I feel like having this practical stuff to supplement kind of the foundational things is important.
Instructional design strikes me. I'm not a librarian, but it strikes me as sort of somewhat sort of apart from what most sort of librarians see as their sort of day-to-day role. So, do you think that instructional design? But then again, it may be that it's not being done elsewhere in the institution. I mean, was it a deliberate choice for you to get involved in this area, or did you see it as a natural extension of your library work?
I felt like it was very much a natural extension of the types of things that I was doing. Wanting to, whether it's designing websites or, creating instructional videos. A few colleagues and I had been creating instructional videos in the early aughts, and Oh, some of them are still out there on the internet, and they are something else. That you can they show their age. But I felt like it would be good to learn more about how people learn with multimedia, for example. How you structure things on a page. Whether you capture. How you just all of the different types of design elements that go into just a simple website or video. And so, yeah, I feel like it's something, and you're seeing more librarians, I think, who have maybe taken some instructional design courses, or maybe, or at least interested in it. And there are certainly people who are instructional design librarians, which is actually one of my titles. And it's always nice to collaborate and communicate with those individuals when you come across them. And I feel like maybe it's something that we're going to continue to see to grow in our profession, is maybe more interest in that. I know some of the graduate students here that come through our program, have talked to me about, instructional design classes, or maybe getting a little experience with it, say through doing this independent study or something like that. And I have worked with some people on those sorts of things. So, and again, I think they're all to the good for helping you understand how to better, teach your colleagues how to do things, or to work directly with students and faculty.
One of the models that you talked about in your doctorate is something called the I Learn model. And in fact, it seems like you got involved with that and ended up sort of being involved in revising that book as well. How did that come about?
So when I was in my doctoral program, my advisor was wonderful, and I took so many classes with him, and I thoroughly enjoyed working with Dr. Gary Anglin on my studies. He happened to know Dr. Delia Newman, so she is now Professor Emerita at Drexel's College of Computing and Informatics. She's someone who has an instructional design background, but also a school media librarianship, like research background. And Dr. Anglin, my advisor, had been like, okay, Stacey, I know you do all this library stuff, but let's not do library stuff for your dissertation. Let's do, think about something broader. But interestingly, he knew Delia. He introduced me to Delia at a conference, and Delia's book had just come out, and he said, "Oh yeah, okay. If you want to work with this is okay. This is not really a library thing per se." But it's funny. It is, because I feel like, and especially when I was doing a lot of reading and things related to the foundations of iLearn and just kind of how this model came about for Delia, and like what it's grounded in. I mean, it's very much librarianship. It's information literacy. It's all those sorts of things. So it was great that I had the blessing of my advisor, and I had a wonderful research mentor to work with. Dr. Newman she's fabulous. And yes, ultimately I did end up as a co-author on the second edition of her book.
Amazing. So why was it necessary to update the model? I mean, is there a methodology that lasts for all time, or I mean, why the need to change?
Well, that's a great question. So we Delia, in addition to several of her colleagues at Drexel, who are actually in the School of Education, and she's over basically on the information science side of things, they had started testing the model actually in more K-12 environments, which the model is essentially for the K-12 audience, though I took it and for my dissertation and used it to design instruction for first-year students in a required writing course, to design both the instruction and instructional objects like an online research guide. I use the model for that, but they were using the model in a bunch of different audiences, like sixth graders for one, kindergarten students for one study. But the reason that we ended up updating the book was because we had done these practical things with Delia's model, and so we felt, the first edition was Delia's her own work, her creation of this learning model, which is essentially, how to learn with information through identifying, locating, evaluating, and a lot of application, reflection, and integration of knowledge. So the second edition of the book was all of us, my colleagues from Drexel in the School of Education and myself, working with Delia to provide practical examples for how we'd use the book, related in the model, related to information literacy, and critical evaluation, and several different things.
So this is remarkable. So are you saying that a methodology that was established for K-12, you then applied in a sort of an undergraduate context, and it works? You think that that's the remarkable thing. I mean, is it? How far does it go? Can you use it for postgrads?
Well, it's certainly possible. One of the things that I used to tell Delia, and she enjoyed this, was I said, the only difference between a high school senior and a college freshman is, 3 months of summer vacation. And, I'm sure I'm not the first person who has said that, but I mean, really, there's not a lot of difference. When you're first coming in, still, you're adjusting from high school life. So the model actually, in my dissertation, it was a no significant difference in the quantitative aspects of the dissertation, but that's, without going down that path, it's not entirely unexpected because, it's an education dissertation where you're comparing two different methods in one-shot instruction. So, the opportunities to find any real effect were going to be minimal, but my advisor really wanted me to do a quantitative dissertation, which was fine. It was a good experience of doing that and, not finding any outcomes. But some of the other folks on my committee really, and Delia too, really wanted me to ask some questions about how people use things. And it turned out that using the iLearn model to design SpringShare's LibGuides, the students responded well to that. They performed slightly better on the pre and post test. They definitely had more feedback. They used the guide more often than they did the guide that just followed a more standard systems design. So I got, something came out of it, and it's odd. I've actually seen that work cited when people are talking about LibGuide design. So, iLearn for LibGuide design is something I think that we discovered. So yeah, that certainly could work for all levels. So possibly, a graduate student guide, a research guide, or something like that, designed with iLearn could be a thing.
So the methodology might stay the same, but you've been involved with producing learning materials for over 20 years. So what has changed since you first got involved?
Well, I think things. That's a good question. I feel like, in some ways the tools are easier. Some of the early tools, you really had to have a fair amount of technical know-how to figure out how to use them. I can remember developing a video with several colleagues here. It was an orientation video. It's out there. We actually presented at LOEX about it, and it did very well. It won an American Library Association award quite some time ago. I can't even watch it now. Just the shakiness of the camera and the abrupt cuts with the editing software that was, pretty new at the time. So I feel like the tools have gotten so much easier because we spent a lot of time just learning the tools back then and helping each other with the tools. But now that the tools are much easier to use and much more accessible than they once were, now we have to really think about what our message is and how we're presenting it. So, here comes instructional design again. If you have that good foundation for, how people learn, what are successful methods for designing a learning object or any sort of instructional experience. I think it's important to know that, because it's just very easy to put something together that's polished. What message is it sending?
Well, one of the things that surprised me, I was fascinated to hear from Helen's presentation at the recent Charleston conference, was the realization that the banning smartphones in K-12 meant that many of the new undergraduates arriving with no concept of how to use a device to look things up. It seems like sort of here was a change, that here was a fundamental change in how in if you like the sort of the baggage that people brought with them in terms of ability to search and find things. Have you found this?
The first time that I actually here at the university, I encountered a faculty member who had a box, and he went around and he picked up all the phones in the room. Like, they have to turn in the phones before they begin the class, and I'm thinking, what a mess that must be to try to figure out which phone is yours at the end of the class and get on to your next class. It's a strange thing to do, but I feel like, and I think sometimes we make a lot of assumptions, especially those of us who've been doing this for a long time, about what we think students know and where we think they are in their experience with finding and using information. I mean, you can take a good example, folks who maybe help students directly. Just a few years ago, I was still working a reference desk somewhat regularly. And it's amazing to see just how little maybe a student understands file structure. Just the concept of, I've saved something, where is it on my computer? How do I find it again? How does this work? So, we sort of make assumptions that, oh yeah, they must be very techy because, they're younger and they've just come out of high school, and so they know how to do all of these things. But that's not necessarily the case. So no, I mean, I'm not, surprised that maybe students aren't as adept at searching for information as maybe we assume that they are, just because they've had access to all of these tools for so long.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room of sort of AI. And do you think AI has changed the kind of instructional landscape?
I feel like anything I say is not going to be that original. I think everybody's already compared it to, it was like the coming of Google or the coming of Wikipedia, or, it's this game changer for all of us. Or even if we go back, to, we moved away from printed indexes and, and that sort of thing. So, it's definitely something that, that we all have to, pay attention to, and hopefully not be reactive to, to try to, there are certainly things that several of my colleagues here are doing, to try to get ahead of things and to work with faculty on adopting AI tools in their courses, or at least understanding them better, and, how, as librarians, I mean, we've always offered to be at least, instructional partners, with our colleagues, with our faculty colleagues. And, I think this is just another example of where we can work together and help, because for so long, we sort of thought we owned information literacy, and we will try to, we will teach your students information literacy. But now we have AI literacy, and, it's so pervasive. So just what are we, how can we support our faculty and our students in using these tools?
So you've been involved in producing AI literacy material yourself. So clearly you see a need for it.
Yes, and I feel like if we have the tools there for people to use, I feel like, that is one thing that we can do. We have several open Canvas courses that are open enrollment. for anyone to use in our campus community. And some of the information literacy focused one that we have a number of courses that do adopt that. And students go through it for credit. I mean, it only takes maybe half an hour or so to go through this and to complete the exercises, to complete the quizzes and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's important that we have something related to generative AI as well. Of course, it's an ever-changing landscape. You build something and then all of a sudden it needs to be updated again, but that's often the case with many of these things.
One of the things that's happened with that I've noticed with Gen AI is a dramatic change, a shift in towards sort of credibility and authority. That whereas I remember from my pre-web assignments at school being sent to the library, and I'd dutifully copy things out of Encyclopedia Britannica, and I'd trust it because it was Britannica. Nowadays, people get material from everywhere, and the problem is deciding how valid or trustworthy it might be. So, do you think that's an important theme for the AI age?
Absolutely, and we were actually just talking about this morning, my colleagues and I, and just like the importance of things like lateral reading skills, to help people fact check as they go along. And there are so many things that we all encounter, in our personal lives too, that this looks real. Is this legit or not? And that's I feel like teaching students how to critically evaluate information. That has been our role, and that continues to be our role. But we probably need to think more too about how we can work with faculty more closely, and helping them navigate that, and helping them help students gain these skills. And it's exciting being at the University of Kentucky while watching all of this unfold. So I've actually been on. We have a university-wide team called Advance that drafts recommendations for faculty in the use of AI, for students and staff employees too, for how you might use AI effectively, how it can save you time, maybe some of the types of activities where it would be appropriate, but then of course, the activities too, where it is not appropriate. But we have been very, very upfront about the types of things that we're educating people on. Just a couple of weeks ago, our university president announced cats. We have a lot of cat-themed things here at the University of Kentucky. We're the Wildcats. Cats AI is the Commonwealth of Kentucky's AI transdisciplinary strategy. And so this is going to be a bunch of working groups working together to build literacy tools, which, that's terrific. Sandboxes for people to experiment. We're going to have some certificate programs for students and also for employees to hone their skills. But this is all happening at the university level. And it's really exciting that, as they say, we're committed to becoming an AI university here. So I think that we're putting the literacy skills up front. It is a wonderful thing, and it's a wonderful opportunity for librarians here to be involved in.
Sounds great. Do you think it's, compared with when you were a student, do you think it's easier or more difficult for students today to learn than when you were a student?
Oh, that's a tough question, because I can remember having to make physical photocopies of all my reserves, and I can remember having to use all the printed indexes to do things, and where things now that take one step would take 10 back then, and also you had to be physically located to do just about anything you needed to do. But I feel like you always need to evaluate whatever you're looking at, and you need to, consider what you're reading, form your own opinions, do your own lateral reading on whatever it is that you're looking at. but I don't know that it was that critical back then as it is now. These tools have made things so much faster and easier, that it probably is a little easier to skip over, what do I think about this? How am I, how do I interpret it? How do I evaluate this and decide what it means to me? That might have been a little easier to do back then, but yeah, I don't know. It's so different. It's hard to say. I can't imagine what it would be like to be a student today. I mean, I still remember when you went out and you were going to meet friends. If they weren't in the appointed place and time, you were basically doomed for your plans, because what do? You start calling answering machines and leaving messages and hoping you can catch up with your friends. So many of these things I think are taken for granted now that were once more challenging for us, whether writing a paper or meeting your friends at the mall.
Well, it sounds like from what you describe that the students of today are very lucky to have you around to provide these materials and guidance in sort of making effective use of the resources. So I, for one, would be very pleased to have you on around to be assistant through the learning process. So anyway, thanks very much for your time, Stacey. It's been fascinating talking to you and learning more about you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.